Well, hey folks, we've had a few days. Buzzy and I took a week off. We were in the Caribbean together, had a great time. No, I'm just kidding you. Actually, took a few days off schedule-wise, some things we needed to get done. We're still anticipating our governor making some kind of an edict, proclamation, whatever side of the bed he wakes up on and decides whether, puts his finger in the air and says, okay, we're going to open, we're not going to open. It's all up to his whims and all the other things. Of course, who knows? Let's just say it that way. Well, once again, we're here to do we've been talking about the end times in real time. This is our real time series, and I hear from many of you, a lot of you, that say you've really enjoyed this so far. And we're kind of winding down in this series. We're going to talk about a few things. We may be finished with it today. It may take us another session. But either way, Buzzy and I have talked also about maybe continuing and talking about the tabernacle, the temple, maybe how the temple plays a role in the end times, and that type of a thing. So we'll probably get into that and speak a little bit more to those issues and items. Well, my friend, how's it going down in Virginia?
It's going great. In fact, just this past weekend, we met inside for the first time in 2.5 months. And I'll tell you what, and I told you this earlier, it was probably one of the best services we've had since I've been down here. I've been here about 2.5 years. And we just kind of opened it up. We had music, and then we had a time of sharing. We didn't record it because these testimonies were very personal. And they were, and it was just tremendous to see. And the whole gist was, what did you learn during this time?
Yeah,
right. Sheltered in place and restricted as far as what we could do and where we could go. And I'll tell you what, it was just a blessing. The service was tremendous. And so we're allowed to meet inside now. And we have, I think, most of the people did not have masks on. Some did, and those who had very kind of ill health. But we had communion, and it was just a tremendous, tremendous service. It was just we were glad to get back together as a church family.
I know that, like you, we've been out in the parking lot, and man, the Lord has blessed us with radically great weather. I want to get back inside, but honestly, being out in the parking lot hasn't been terrible. But coming back inside, there's just something about it. And it's funny, our plan to reopen involves a similar service. Probably just, hey, let's get together, let's have worship, let's give testimonies, share from that way, and just kind of do the same thing. I'm really curious. I challenged a group of guys. We had a little coffee meeting one morning. There was about 20 of us. And
hey, you didn't invite me, man.
Come anytime you want to come up, Buzzy. But yeah, you're up early enough to make it, that's for sure. But we got together, and I challenged the guys. I said, listen, if we get to the end of this thing and you haven't read a book of the Bible, if you haven't felt like you've grown in the Word or grown in your prayer life, then you've really squandered an opportunity that you could have had for personal growth and also to reach out to other people. So I'm really curious. I think we're going to hear some amazing testimonies out of this. I think that, any time that you have crisis, God just does amazing stuff. So, you know how
you are going to have an amazing service because I know your people there.
Yeah, you're right.
Their hearts.
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, you're going to hear some amazing, amazing things when you get back together.
Well, I'm a subscriber to Rahm Emanuel. I mean, that may be shocking considering he's a leftist, but the reality is you never let a crisis go to waste. I don't believe God ever lets a crisis go to waste. I think He uses it for His glory and our uplifting. So. But anyway.
Exactly. And you know what? Ministry doesn't change. Doesn't matter the venue, whether you're inside or outside. The gospel's the same. The Bible's the same. And people are the same. And so I think the whole ordeal has stretched us as a small ministry down here in Virginia to do things that we wouldn't have normally done. And so we've come out the other end of this, the better for us. And we're more flexible in what we're able to do in case something like this happens again.
Yeah. The corona, and then of course up here just briefly for a moment speak to the what's going on as far as the issues in the United States, the division over the whole race situation, and George Floyd and others, and of course now it's evolved. Unfortunately, what I think's gone on here is the purity of a protest has been hijacked into a leftist agenda, where now once again we want to defund police departments, which makes no sense to me at all. I mean, if someone's kicking your door down at night, I mean, and let's face it, many calls go out from our inner cities to 911 also. Now, I'm not here to tell you the police department is pure and chaste through this whole thing. They certainly aren't. But to say defund the police department, that doesn't really make too much sense to me. How about you?
It's crazy. And you know what? There are evil people everywhere on both sides
That's
of
true.
this.
You're right.
And so we're seeing that, and again, bottom line behind the scenes, this is all Satan's doing. I mean, what does he do? He creates fear.
Chaos.
And when he creates fear, it immobilizes people, and especially believers. I've seen that happen here in our church. It immobilizes believers to do what they should be doing, and they're scared. You've got the virus, you've got the riots, the protests, you have this murder hornet, and now you have an asteroid that's supposed to hit the earth. I mean, you just kept being fed all of this fear. The Bible says that perfect love casts out all fear.
Amen.
And that's our message. And so no matter what the situation is, that's the message of the church.
Buzzy, the truth is this. I know you, and I know myself, and I know a few others, that we do teach end times. We teach the Lord is coming back. And listen, the trumpets, the bowls, all these things that we talk about, they're coming to fruition. And whether they happen this time or the next time, they are going to happen. So please, believers, believe what we're teaching you. Understand that this is not made up and it's going to happen 10,000 years from now. This literally could be happening right around us right now. And so if you keep looking for relief from it, then this is the truth, right? If you keep looking for relief from this, you're going to be like those people in the tribulation period that are there in the darkness, or that have had a third of the water turn into blood, or whatever, that they're seeing going, the vegetation being eaten up around them, locusts flying all over. It's not going to get better if we are in the end times. This is what God is saying.
Yeah, and you know what? All of this is already written down.
That's right.
It's already written down. It's set in stone. God's purpose will prevail in all of this. It's just a matter of time. We know the timeline of these end time events. The only thing that we don't know is what? The timing of the rapture. And so we're to be ready as believers. We're to be looking for his return. And it could be, it could be today, it could be next week, it could be next year. But you and I agree with this, that there is no prophecy yet that has to be fulfilled before that time. I believe that all of it has been fulfilled, and so we are living in these last days, and exciting times for us, because it presents so many opportunities for us to preach the truth to people. Now, whether they accept or not, it's up to them, but we have a responsibility to preach this. Not a lot of preachers that speak about the end times. They're scared, or they don't understand. Well, you know what? The book of Revelation is pretty clear. And it's already written down for us.
Well, and
like I said, God's purpose will be.
You said a mouthful, and the truth is this: it is called Revelation, and it's not Revelation in the sense that people look at it as the name and say, "Oh, it's the revelation of the end times." And no, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, is what it is.
Exactly.
It's His truth. It's the revelation of His truth. So.
Jesus came the first time as the Lamb of God. Remember, he came riding into Jerusalem, not on a white horse in victory, but he came riding what? On a donkey, a symbol of peace. Well, next time Jesus comes, it's not going to be as an agent of peace. He's going to come back as judge and as victor. And so we don't like to talk about that aspect of Jesus. We like to talk about the nice Jesus, the Jesus of love, and he is. But there is another aspect that's going to be coming, and that's what the revelation is. It's the revelation of the character of Jesus. It's the revelation of the purpose of God in sending his son Jesus.
Amen.
And it's exciting.
It's exciting.
It really is.
Well, how about we open with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started in earnest with our little dialogue and kind of exploring as we start to close in on the finality of all this, of what is still yet to come. Why don't you open us in prayer, Buzz?
Father, we thank you, Lord, for the times in which we live. Lord, I thank you for the opportunities, Lord, that you have presented, Father, to us here, Lord, in Virginia, and to Pastor Gary and Calvary Chapel up there in New Jersey, Father. And I thank you for the things that we've learned. I thank you for the fact that people are listening, their hearts are open, Lord, to what is being said and what is already written down and is already purposed in your heart. So guide our conversation today, Lord, as we talk about, Lord, the truth. Your word is found in the book of Revelation. In your precious name that we pray. Amen.
Well, Buzzy, as we left off last time we were together a few days ago, and we had been going through the series of events that have been going on. We watched basically the 4 horsemen that have come along to start things off. Well, the rapture of the church. Then we get into the tribulation period, and we watched the seals being unopened and loosened. We watched then, of course, trumpets that have come up on the scene, and now we're into the vials or the bowls. And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it seems like with each successive wave, whatever was being doled out onto the earth, and as you have said many times, you know, whether it's from God or whether it's from Satan, whatever it's coming from, it certainly seems like they're intensifying more and more and more. Is that what it is? Is that a correct statement?
Well, not only are they intensifying, but one is being heaped upon the other. It's not like one goes away. Just like the judgments on Pharaoh, you know, Pharaoh prayed and said, Moses, please pray to take these things away, and they were taken away. Well, that doesn't happen here. When a judgment happens, it continues, and then another judgment on top of that. So we have one heaped upon the other. And so in these last 3.5 years, you not only have the wrath of Satan, who now down on the satanic trinity, Satan and the Antichrist and the false prophet, you not only have the wrath of that satanic trinity against Israel, against the believers, but you also now have the wrath of God in these bowl judgments being meted out against Antichrist's kingdom and unsaved mankind and the man. One judgment is bad enough, but when you're talking about Satan's judgment and also God's judgment all happening at once, I mean, you're talking about literal hell on earth during this time.
Isn't it interesting when you stop again and you think about, as a nation, what we have been going through probably since the election of Donald Trump, and this is not meant to be a political statement either way, but we have been thrown into chaos over and over and over, whether it's political scenarios to go after him, whether it's in the judgment of a Supreme Court judge, you know, the appointing of Kavanaugh, and then you get Russian dossiers and all this other stuff, and then you start to get into now where, you know, the coronavirus, which has thrown us into a complete tizzy, the collapse of the economy because people aren't able nor allowed to fulfill their jobs in many cases. And now with that, we have the horrendous death of a man that was just a horrible, horrible thing. And now with the racist issue being raised up again, and while there are peaceful protesters, we do know that there's a lot of chaos with Antifa and these other groups. And you almost get like a microcosm of what we're talking about, how these things, no wonder people are in fear and in panic, because you just sort of catch your breath and then boom, something else is now being thrown down upon you. But in this case, they just seem to have accumulated throughout. Like, you don't get relief. It's just what's next is what your mindset almost is.
And when you talk to people, and I'm referring to the people in our church, I mean, they're really scared. They're frightened,
right,
because of what they're being fed. And like you said, it was the virus, and now it's the protests and the riots and the burning, and of course then there's that murderous hornet, and now you have this asteroid that's supposed to be hitting the earth. And there is genuine fear, but like you said, these things are nothing. These things are like so minute compared to the judgments that are going to be heaped them in these past 3.5 years.
Well, the truth is we're not seeing a third of the world's population being wiped out as a result of these things necessarily. But anyway, so when we left off, we were talking. We were definitely dealing wherever you put the woes, but definitely dealing with the bowls and silence in heaven. We had the kings of the east, which could be a confederation of Asian armies coming across. I've heard everything from all the Asian populace, including also armies from India, maybe Pakistan, whatever. But we know that that the number can't be counted. We've never seen an army so formidable in our lives, that's for sure. And they're coming across a river that's been dried up, and they're being led, it seems like, by demonic entities. Now, in your opinion, what you read in the scriptures, why do the kings of the East, why are they heading down the Euphrates, heading to the Middle East? What do you think is drawing them into this conflict?
Well, obviously, Satan knows. Satan knows what already is written down, even including in the book of Revelation. And so the chapter, we're talking about the sixth angel where he pours out his bowls on the Euphrates. But what is leading them? The three evil spirits. There's Satan, there's Antichrist, and the false prophet. And they're performing miraculous signs to go after all of the kings of the world to gather them for the battle on this great day of God Almighty. And so they're being wooed by these miraculous signs. These guys have to be true. These guys have to be God. Because remember, that's Satan's goal. His goal is to be worshipped. And so this is what's happening. The armies of the world finally are going to launch out and where they're heading towards Israel. Because Israel they hate.
Yes.
And they hate Israel today. They're going to hate Israel even more so.
Right.
During at that time. And so that's their goal. Their goal is to drive Israel into the sea, and whoever is guiding them, little do they know that they're going to meet up with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
We know that they eventually are going to wind up in a place called Armageddon, or Armageddon, the hill or the mount of Megiddo, and we know that Armageddon, the Battle of Armageddon, is going to happen there. We know throughout history there's been 200 or more battles on this famed site. We know that this is where Egypt would battle a few battles there. We know that Israel would defend there. We know that King Josiah was killed there. We know that Saul and his sons were killed there. We know that Israel has won great victories there. Barak won his victory there back in Judges. And so we know there's been some good things. We know there's been some bad things. When we left off the other day, it seemed like Napoleon's the one who said there's never been a more perfect place for basically a world war. And I believe you've been there. I've been there a few times. And when you climb up onto the mountain and you look down over the plains of Jezreel there, you are confronted by the immensity and how this huge valley could easily, you would see the armies all gathering in this place. And it's a staging area because it's not too far away from Jerusalem proper. And you could see how the armies would stage there to go into Jerusalem itself. And so tell us a little bit, if you would, about Armageddon, Buz.
Well, Armageddon is mentioned only once in the Bible. Revelation 16, I believe, verse 14, it says, "And they assembled then at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon." As you mentioned, 200 battles have been fought there. It's 14 miles wide, 20 miles long. It's 16 miles north of Jerusalem, just southwest of Nazareth. And like you said, Napoleon called it the most natural battlefield on the whole earth. And so you have this tremendously big army now moving across, with tanks and planes and all of all this battlefield equipment. If you can imagine, and imagine John now, who's writing this, who has a heavenly perspective, looking down and seeing this myriad of millions upon millions of soldiers making their way west toward Jerusalem. Why? Because they hate Israel, and they're being led by the satanic trinity. And chapter 19 in Revelation, right on through the first couple of verses in chapter 20 is the battle. But there's no battle that happens because they all gather there And then chapter 19, towards the end, all of a sudden, in the midst of this, heaven is opened, and behold, a white horse appears, and the one sitting on it is called Faithful and True. Who is this?
Well, we know who that is, right?
This is Jesus Christ. And his eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head there are many crowns, and his name has a name.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this then, okay? Because chronologically then, okay, so this is all with the outpouring of the sixth seal, or the sixth vial bowl?
That's correct. The sixth angel, dries up the great Euphrates, this great army.
And they start heading over,
across.
but correct me if I'm wrong, it's in the seventh though, because in the seventh you still, isn't it that where we see hail and all the other things come down, all the like 90-pound hail pieces and all that?
Exactly. From the sky, huge hailstones of about 100 pounds each fell upon man. And listen, and they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was
so do
terrible.
you think, let me ask you this then, I'm just trying to get this in my head. Do you think then that like the Battle of Armageddon, which by the way, just speaking briefly to that, Buzzy, it seems like both sinner and saint, redeemed and heathen, saved, unsaved, however you want to say it, those who have crossed the line of faith, those who haven't. It seems like everybody's got an interest in Armageddon. People, movies, or Bruce Willis movie, Armageddon. People always think of Armageddon. They always tie apocalypse into the idea of Armageddon. It really has captured the imagination. There seems to be, in the heart of man, this wonderful or warped, depending on how you look at it, place for this battle called Armageddon. And we really do believe it's going to be a battle, but you're telling us it ain't so much of a battle.
There's not going to be much fighting on the enemy's end. In fact, Armageddon, General Douglas MacArthur, when he was signing the peace treaty with Japan, he said, "We have had our last chance. If we will not devise something greater and more equitable than war, Armageddon will be at our door." This was General Douglas MacArthur, 75, almost 80 years ago. And I don't think it's going to be much of a battle, because, who's doing the fighting on the believers' end?
Right.
It's Jesus Christ, isn't it?
Right.
And he's coming down, and along with him are all of the saints, and the armies of heaven are coming with him.
Do you think that this in this battle? Do you think that's when, like, in other words, when they're staging, they're getting everything together, ready to whatever conflict to head it, because they're obviously going into Israel. They hate Israel. They're in Israel at this point, but they hate Israel. And then Jesus comes back. They turn their guns, whatever. Do you think this is when the hail and everything else is going to interrupt also? Do you think, like, while Christ is coming back, it's going to be what's the word I'm looking for? Cataclysmic.
Cataclysmic.
That's the word. Do you think it's going to be cataclysmic? And at that point, do you think we're going to see hail and everything else? Is that when it's reserved? I'm just trying to get the chronology in my head of when these other things are going to be happening.
Well, we've seen this before in the Old Testament, where Israel was back up, their backs were against the wall, and they didn't have to do anything. God did it for them. And that one instant, what was it, 180,000 were killed by God, and Israel didn't have to lift a finger. When their backs were against the wall, the sea wall of the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were coming down on them, Moses raises his staff, and God does the work. Israel just scampered across on dry ground, and God allowed the water back on. There were no shots fired. Egypt was one of the most powerful armies of the world during that time.
Right.
This powerful army later on who came against Israel, God struck them dead, overnight. And so I believe, and if you can imagine, what is Israel thinking during this time, as this tremendous horde, this army is coming toward them, and all of a sudden in the midst of it, I don't believe there are going to be too many shots fired. I really don't. I think the hail and these big hail and the storm and the rain, it's going to throw them into such confusion as God has done before. And of course, the angel in verse 17, chapter 19 says, he calls to the birds that fly overhead, come gather for the great supper of God.
Can you
He eats
imagine
the
that?
flesh. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
they're gonna be tearing this stuff apart the entire time. So maybe this is a good time to kind of go on a sidebar. We're talking.